You are listening to the Intelligent Racer Podcast, where we look to educate and entertain the endurance racing community through discussions with racing professionals and elite age groupers.
In today's episode, I speak with Jeff Browning. He's a runner who has completed over 100 ultra-distance races, including 25 100-milers. He talks with us about the keys to his longevity in the sport. He also shares some highlights from his 2016 season at Western States, Hard Rock, and Hurt, as well as offering some valuable running and recovery tips. I hope you enjoy. Jeff, welcome to the podcast. How are you doing today?
I'm great. How are you?
Good. So let's start off with talking a little bit about how did you get into ultra running?
Well, I started out, running, doing traditional sports growing up in the 80s, 70s, and 80s in Missouri. I grew up on a farm, so I ran everywhere, whether it was running to get a tool from my dad out of the shop or running to my grandparents' house who were a quarter mile away to get ice cream steal it out of their deep freeze. I was constantly running as a kid, and I played, kind of traditional sports in the 80s. There weren't really any extreme sports, especially in the Midwest. So I kind of just, grew up doing that: football, baseball, basketball, track. And then, in hindsight, probably was a pretty good track runner, but my football coach was the track coach, and I wanted to play football, and that was like what the small town I lived in was all about. So I didn't really focus on running. I just kind of, running was just part of sports. And so I always did that. And then when I did win the 800 meter in the conference 800 meter my senior year of high school. But I didn't really think about track, doing collegiate track or anything like that. We didn't have a cross country program. So I went to college and kind of went a little bit of a party route and went to a big University of Missouri, and found mountain biking in the early 90s. Bought my first mountain bike in 93 and got into kind of endurance training back then just for the fun of it, just being in the woods and riding single track, and kind of was in this bike culture in the 90s, and then moved to Colorado in the late 90s and ended up doing all kinds of, mountain biking and climbing and a little bit of trail running, but mainly just to be in shape for climbing. And, but still was considered myself a mountain biker. And wasn't until I moved to Bend in 2000, I had met a buddy, Rod Bean, who owns the local Patagonia store here in Bend, and is a good ultra runner in his own right. And he and I kind of, we befriended each other early on, and back when Bend was still pretty small. And he was a runner and I was a mountain biker, and I was trying to get him into mountain biking. He was trying to get me into trail running, and obviously he kind of won that battle. He finally took up mountain biking the last few years, but he and I ran a ton early on, and he's the one that introduced me to Western States 100, which was my first 100 in 2002. And so my first, 3 years in the sport, 2001, 02, and 03, were really just kind of, learning to run ultras. I kind of approached it as just finishing. Wasn't trying to race. I was just trying to finish. It was more like a reason to adventure in the mountains. And at the time I had my first, my wife and I had a first child in 2002. So, I kind of got into running before I had kids, and then just kind of saw it as an adventure outlet, and, still mountain biked and still climbed a little bit and snowboard and ski and all those other sports. And so, yeah, I just kind of progressed. And then when I broke 24 hours for my first 100 at Western States, I said, maybe I could be okay at this. And that's when I started to try to run a little faster here and there, probably in 03, I was plagued with a lot of injuries. And then 04 season, I had a pretty solid season that year, and I got 5th at Wasatch and broke 24 hours for my second 100. And that's when I was like, okay, I'm going to try to race. And I just got on the Patagonia. Back then, there was the Patagonia Montreal ultra running team. And, it was that early grassroots stuff that was going on in ultra running. It was still a very small cult sport. Right. And that's kind of was my introduction with this cool little ultra running tribe that was going on. And
it's grown a lot since, right?
Oh man, it's totally different now, dude.
Yeah.
It's so different. Like, just the mentality is even different. People are more aggro, and people are training really hard, and you have to race hard. It used to be such a social, it's still a cool social scene, but it's definitely, the growth in the sport definitely changed a little bit, at least from my experience of being in it 17 years. There's just certain personalities that have come to the sport now that are definitely more, people are more like judgmental of like not getting into lotteries. And, there's a whole debacle going on in the Yahoo group on Hard Rock right now.
Yeah.
On Hard Rock right now. And that's just silly. I mean, to be like that, like, go run a different race. If you can't get in it, like just figure it out and go do something else.
Yeah.
Man.
There's a lot of real estate out there to run. So,
Yeah, there's so many cool hundreds out there. Hard Rock is a great sport. I mean, a great event, but it's not the end all to be all of all races. Like, there's so many other good hundreds. Go support smaller hundreds that are trying to grow. Like, that's how I kind of see it. And that's what I do. If I can't get into something, I go support other stuff. It took me 7 or 8 years to get back into Western States. And it took me 7 years to get into Hard Rock the second time.
Right.
So, I was patient and I didn't complain. And I mean, I might've complained to my wife a little bit, but, I wasn't doing it publicly. I don't know. I just think, like, we have such a cool sport. Just, let things go, man. People are trying to do most race directors are not making money. They're just doing it for the love of the sport. So just, like, give them the benefit of the doubt.
Yeah, I mean, the culture in ultra running is amazing, and hopefully it doesn't get destroyed as things get more and more competitive and more people get into it. There's been some other sports that have kind of been casualties to that kind of, path. But let me ask you a question on your longevity, because, I mean, it's one of the most notable things about your running career is that, you've done well over 100 ultras, and obviously you've had some injuries and things to deal with. But overall, I mean, you've been able to handle it and have this long, active lifestyle. So what are some of the keys to that? Are you big into cross training, or do you have any other kind of tips or anything around how to prevent overuse injuries and things like that?
Sure. I mean, that's a great question. I think everyone's, individual. And one thing I would have to put a caveat to my longevity is that I've been doing, like, sports since I was, 4 or 5 years old. And that's a multitude of different kinds of sports. And I got into strength training really early. So, like, 7th grade, through senior year of high school and all through college, I lifted weights. So, I mean, I lifted 4 to 5 days a week. And did very, very specific strength type training, like strength type training for football. So, like, max every 6 weeks, working on all body groups and, upper body, lower body, and all that kind of stuff. So I do have a pretty big base. When I got into mountain biking, I had a big strength base and a lot of different sports. And then I did that for a decade, pretty hardcore, probably training 5 days a week on a mountain bike. And still did some strength training and climbing before I even got into ultra running. So, I have a good 20 years of endurance and strength training before I got into ultras in my late 20s, or at least 15 years. So I do have to always throw that caveat out. Like, I have a huge base before I got into ultra running. And so when I got into ultra running, I definitely had some muscle imbalances from cycling, and I definitely didn't fix those until the off season of 04, 05, 06. I worked with a strength training coach in the off season and did some serious strength stuff. Where I was like, times where I was like laying on the floor after the workout, like couldn't get up type, like felt sick type workouts.
Yeah.
So, where we were going to past failure, where this coach would help me like get another 3 after I'd gone to complete failure on like hip and leg sled or squats or something. So, I definitely worked pretty hard to get those muscle imbalances fixed. And after that, I quit getting injured. Like, I quit having knee tracking issues and all that kind of stuff. So I'm a student of the sport. I like, if there's something going on with me, I'm going to try to figure out how to fix it. It's got to be a muscle imbalance. It's got to be some kind of inconsistency. It's got to be something going on. So I try to figure that out and try to find a solution. So that's just my mentality, and that's how I've approached it. And that's how I approach coaching too. When I have someone who's broken, I'm like, how can we fix them? or how can we keep them? If it's been having issues, let's figure out what the root cause of that issue is and try to fix it. So whether it's muscle imbalance, whether it's strength or whatever. Now, I really believe in strength training, and I think every runner should do it. You don't have to spend, an hour in the gym twice a week, but you should spend 15 to 20 minutes in a good circuit that works everything from the top of your head to the soles of your feet, once or twice a week. And definitely twice a week is ideal. But I mean, even if you're slammed and a family person, once a week, you can get by with. And it doesn't have to be that much time commitment, but it needs to be there if you want longevity. I mean, the fact of the matter is we lose muscle mass after 35, and as ultra runners, we lose it twice as fast because we're constantly cannibalizing muscle tissue. So you've got to build it back. So, that's the one thing I've done the whole time is strength train. I took a little hiatus in my early years of ultra running when I had all the injuries, and then I got like back in it and in 04 and 05. And that's ever since then knock on wood, I've hardly got injured. The other thing is diet, that's 70% of everything. If you look at like strength training circles, you look at, they always say it's, bodybuilding 70% nutrition. And I think that is with any sports, especially endurance sports, because it's all about recovery. And if you're not putting the right fuel in, that motor is going to be like smoking and coughing. I really believe in good food and, we eat organic and natural, and I support local meat, so I know, I grew up on a farm and I've seen that commercial model and it's not clean. Mm-hmm. And I don't like to support, meat sources that are commercially produced, because those animals aren't healthy. And so any research that's been done on meat being bad for you has been done on commercial meat. And it hasn't been done on like really clean meat. And that's where the good profiles of proteins and fats are. And so that's why, and I'm not going to apologize for this either, but I highly believe that we as humans we're omnivores and we're supposed to eat meat, and that's why we have canines. And, so we have to eat it. We don't have to eat a ton, but we got to eat it in moderation. And I think there's sustainable, healthy ways to do that. So, I think good food, eat like a vegetarian with all your vegetables and fruits. And I try to personally stay away from grains. And that's just my own personal preference. I kind of eat primally. And then I eat like a hunter-gatherer and eat tubers and fruits and veggies and meat and lots of fat, lots of good fat. And I think those are some of the things that help with longevity. And I also don't run, I guess the last piece would be I don't run mega mileage, but I do run in the mountains. So I kind of see that. Carl Meltzer and I are a lot alike in that regard. We both like to run elevation and run up mountains. So I tend to do a lot more, climbing, when I'm running than I do, like even my easy days, I go run hills. And so, I definitely don't run mega mileage or anything like that. And I do cross train a little bit, not a ton, but I do ride my bike, and I probably should ride it more, but the time commitment's hard for me as a dad and a husband and having a wife and 3 kids and coaching business and a graphic design business, and an athlete. Those 3 things really take up a lot of time. So I just don't have time to get on my bike as much as I'd like. But I still do get on it.
So let's switch gears and talk a little bit about your past season. You just mentioned before Western States and Hard Rock as 2 races that you've done in the past. And in 2016, you actually did both. And as most people know, they're pretty close apart. So, first of all, for those not familiar with these races, they're obviously legendary, but we have some listeners who aren't in or don't know the U.S. Ultra scene that closely. Can you help compare and contrast those at a very high level of what the differences are and just sort of the challenges of each? And then secondly, how did you have a turnaround time of that quick? I think it was 19 days in this case. And how are you able to recover that quickly? Do you have any tactics or anything you follow to help with that recovery?
Sure. So let's start with the 2 races. Western States 100, oldest 100 in the U.S., oldest 100 in the world, trail 100 in the world, the first trail 100, mountain 100. started in, I think, 1974. That race is hot. It's from Squaw Valley Resort in Tahoe to Auburn, California, finishes on the high school track in Auburn. It goes through the high country and Granite Chief Wilderness. In the high country, it stays above 5,000 feet for about 40 miles before it starts traversing the American River Canyon drainages, and then through Forest Hill, and then eventually into Auburn. That race is a net downhill of a little over 24,000 feet, I believe, or around 24,000 feet. And then up is a little over, it's like 18 and change of climbing. So it's a solid, hot race, super competitive, very, prestigious race because it's old. It's part of the Ultra Trail World Tour. It brings out a huge elite field. And so that one's tough. It's just always hot. It's normally late, the upper 90s to low hundreds with 90-some% humidity. So heat management and hydration is super important in that race. And because it's a big field, it's hard. It's easy to run too hard in the first half because there's so many fast guys.
Right.
And then contrasting that to, normally Hard Rock is 12 days later. But this year it was 19 days later. But that race is high altitude in southwestern Colorado. So it's a 100-mile circumnavigation of the San Juan Mountains, starts in Silverton, and it goes clockwise and counterclockwise, switches every year. This year was a clockwise year. So we go to Telluride, Ouray, Sherman, which is an old ghost town just west of Lake City, and then finishes in Silverton. It's got nearly 34,000 feet of climbing and descending. So, and your average elevation is over 11,000 feet, and you climb, I think you go over 13 7 times, and you climb a 14er during that race. So you're above tree line a lot in that race. It's a high altitude race. It's tough. So it's a different kind of race than Western States. Western States is hot and fast, and Hard Rock is slow and huge. So those are the two races. Both of them are very hard to get into. Both have like very, very popular lotteries, and it's a really hard race to get into. So I was lucky to get into both of them. And I actually, I accidentally got into both of them, really. I mean, not accidentally, but I had Ultra became a new sponsor of Western States, and they got 2 slots, and I got one of those slots. So I really thank them for getting me into Western States. And I'd already got in the lottery into Hard Rock. So because Hard Rock's so hard to get into in the lottery, I didn't want to waste that slot. So I decided I would race Western States and see what happened at Hard Rock. So that's that piece. So what the other part of your question was
around the recovery and how did you get ready for Hard Rock with only 19 days after a really good performance at States?
You train for Western States and then you just show up at Hard Rock. I'd run hundreds back to back a couple times that close, so I kind of had a little bit of a strategy. I mean, my strategy is for 1 week on any 100, I don't run for a week. For 7 to 10 days, I walk. So I get out every day at lunch. I normally run at lunches during the week, and so I just walk at lunch for 45 minutes and get moving again. And then sleep a little extra, get a massage about a week after Western States, and then start jogging for that middle week. I jogged a little, maybe 30, 40-minute runs, really easy, super easy. And then did a couple strength training workouts in there just to kind of restore range of motion. I think I might have got 2 massages during that 19-day window. And then eat really well. I mean, I'm a really big optimized fat metabolism person, and that's kind of that's my thing, has been for about a year, for all of this whole season, the 2016 racing season. So, I eat a high fat, low carb diet, hunter-gatherer style, like Primal Blueprint's probably the best diet out there, is probably the closest to the way I eat. And I still eat carbohydrates, but I just strategically use them, fruits and tubers,
Right.
sweet potatoes and red potatoes really strategically around harder workouts. And so my carbs are a little higher on long run days and on speed and hill work days. But all my easy days, I'm pretty much kind of low carb, mainly vegetables as my carbs that day. Maybe a strategic fruit here and there, but that's my main regimen. And what I find on that diet compared to the old way, which I've been doing for years, which was kind of a whole foods diet, like a natural whole foods, whole grains, legumes, soaking everything, kind of a nourishing tradition style of diet, meaning good sources of meat, tons of whole grains and rice and potatoes and, sprouted bread and that kind of stuff. That's the way we ate for 10 or 12 years during ultra running, my last 10 or 12 years. And I still was having a few health issues in my 40s, I'm 45. So, and I was like, I eat really healthy, supposedly. And why am I still having some health issues? So, and I was getting massive, inflammation after races. And what I found on this diet is I get hardly any inflammation. And that's been the biggest thing, is the recovery on this diet. So, and I don't even like to call it a diet. It's more of a lifestyle change for me. Like, this is my lifestyle now. And that's how I approach it. Like today I went out to eat, and there was a really good sandwich special, and I just asked for the sandwich with no bread, and I eat everything else, and substitute a side salad if it's, pasta salad or something on the side. And, it's pretty easy to eat this way for me. And I feel so much better on it, and my energy levels are really, really level, and I recover really fast. So that, I think the diet was a huge factor this year for me coming back and racing hard at Hard Rock. And you can't discount the experience, those are my 25th and 26th hundreds. 24th and 25th hundreds. Man, I've done so many, I start to lose count. But anyway.
Yeah, so you have a solid base, but I think it's really interesting that you attribute a lot to the diet, because a lot of people neglect that, and it's a really important thing, especially with inflammation and recovery there. So that's a really important point. So I'm based out of New York City, and so my wilderness is Central Park, which isn't much, but and I'm exaggerating a little bit because I do get outside the city. But for people who aren't in the mountains and they aspire to one day do a Hard Rock 100, I mean, how do they develop those mountain skills that are needed to do a race like that? Obviously, there's the whole aspect of building up the mileage and getting ready for that physically, but there's also a skill set required to be able to handle that rugged wilderness of a race like that. I mean, what would your suggestion be? Is that something that you can get coached, or is that something you just have to go out there and work with people and try safer races before you ramp it up to something like Hard Rock?
Well, I think before you go do Hard Rock, Hard Rock, I would consider for one, you got to have a pretty decent mountain 100-miler qualifier to even get in the lottery. So
yeah, exactly.
So, it's definitely what I call a postgraduate type of 100-miler. But I would say for mountain, just to get ready for mountain hundreds, and you don't live in a locale where you can easily get in the mountains, there's a couple of strategies that I coach. I coach people all over the U.S. remotely. That's part of my deal, is online coaching. So I have a couple of flatlanders. And what I say is go find one. What's the biggest hill you can get to easily? And if you don't have a hill at all, you got to go either find a building where you can go do stairs, because that will really help with foot-eye coordination, on descending and going up. So you can really get, if you have a 40-story building in your city, go run 40 floors to the top and run 40 floors back down and do repeats. At least once a week. If you're getting ready, I would say a couple of times a week you want to do that. And then, if at all possible, if you're going to go do your one long run a week, get out of the city. And if you're in New York, you have the beauty of being able to drive upstate a little bit.
Oh yeah.
Not that far.
Yeah.
And you can get some pretty gnarly hills. So, going and searching out places you can get to, or taking little mini vacations, or using other smaller 50K races and traveling to go do harder races that would have a lot of elevation change. But if the only thing you have is a 40-story building and a treadmill, then you can train for something like this. You can do 10-mile uphills on a treadmill at 12% and get really strong at climbing. You may not be as good descending, but what I would say is getting ready for something like hard rock, or not hard rock, or even any mountain race, and that you don't have those kind of, places you can go to. Just doing some speed work, because one thing that downhill running does do for you is you are running fast when you're running downhill, because you're using gravity. So getting to the point where you would do, say, a 2-mile or 3-mile climb on a treadmill, and then you would do a 2 or 3 mile or a 1-mile time trial on the treadmill at flat. So you put it flat and just, run at sub-threshold pace. You don't have to do threshold pace, but you need to run faster so your legs are turning over well and you're used to that leg turnover. So you're kind of simulating downhill running. And I think if you can do stairs, that's going to help with the pounding of your quads, because you're going to be on concrete steps probably, or metal in a giant skyscraper or a big apartment building or something where you have a stairwell. You could run to the top and then run back down. That's going to help. And the other is strength training, if I lived in a flat area and all I had was a treadmill and stairs to get ready for a mountain race, I would also get in the gym and do some pretty heavy, you definitely want to learn good form before you do it. I would throw that out there, but doing good heavy deadlifts and heavy squats and leg sled and that kind of stuff, and really bombing your quads to get them ready for that downhill. Because the eccentric movement of pounding downhill, it's something like hard rock, you got some places where it's 10 or 12 mile downhills at altitude. So you don't get as much oxygen. And the other is having some kind of a acclimation strategy for that race if you're going to go to altitude, because that really hammers you. You either need to go there the night before so you aren't starting to adapt yet, and because your body's going to break down that first week being at altitude, or you get ready before. And there's plenty of good strategies out there. There's tents you can sleep in and you can rent for 4 or 5 weeks before, or I use something called Alto Lab, which Alto Lab is what it's called, and it is a mask, a simulation mask, but it actually has a scrubber and simulates altitude and you really high intervals, sitting and watching TV. So 6 minutes on, 4 minutes off for an hour. You do a build-up phase, and then every 2 or 3 weeks before you lose adaptation, you do a little 5-day top-off to give yourself a little stimulus so the body continues to keep the red blood cell count. It's the same as going to altitude. It's just, if you're a busy person like me, where you have a business and family and kids, I can't go 5 or 6 weeks early like some of these full-time ultra running athletes to race. I can't go to Leadville 5 weeks early. So, it's easier for me to do a mask at home as a strategy.
Right. So we're almost out of time, but this is the problems with speaking with someone like you who's been on so many adventures. I have so many questions unanswered still, but let me finish up with 2 real quick questions. And I know they're not quick, but I'll allow you to give me the abbreviated answer to them. I would be remiss not to ask a little bit about the Hurt 100, which you won this year in Hawaii. What makes that race so hard? It has a reputation of being one of the hardest out there.
Well, I think what's hard about that race is, there's 2 things that are hard about that race. One is the technicality of the race. The routes are insane. It's usually wet. If it's not raining, there's enough moisture that like the routes get muddy and covered with mud. So you literally have to step between the routes. You can't really step on them, or it's just like grease. So you never can open it up. You're constantly like dancing through the roots and rocks and scrambling and that kind of stuff. So that's hard. The other thing that's hard about that race is that it's a 20-mile loop. And it's not even a loop. It's really a little, like, think of it more like a T shaped. And the shaft of the T is like a little tiny figure 8. And then both the top heads of the T are like an out and back. So the whole time you're going up on the same ridge line over and over and over again, and you have to do 5 laps. So mentally it's really hard because every 20 miles you're at a really sweet aid station right by your car.
Yeah, that
and
is
like
tough.
really close to where you're staying. So it's really tough mentally to come in every 20 miles and just know what's coming, because you got to go do the exact same thing you just did, and know how technical and hard it is to go back out there. That's what's hard about that race. It is mind over matter. Like, you have to have your mental A game like ready, because if you even question that you're going to not finish that race, you won't finish.
Right.
You'll drop, and it's really hard to go back out every single time.
Right.
I think that, and for me, I always knew that going into it. You know, I'd heard about that race a long time ago. Since I first got into ultra running, it's always been on my bucket list. So I knew when I went, like, you don't even think about dropping in that race. You think, I got to go 5 laps and it's going to be really hard every time. So be mentally ready for that. So I always made it really easy to get in and out of that aid station. I was like, I had a drop bag and I had a crew, and I really was in and out. Like, I was there less than 2 minutes most of the time. I think the longest I stayed maybe was 3. And so for me, it was in and out. And once you're back in the woods, you're okay. You know, and I've always had that kind of philosophy when I'm running hundreds is, you know, just get through the aid station. Don't stay too long. I'm already thinking what I need before I even get in there. I get in, I get out, and I get moving again. And once I'm in the woods again, I'm fine. So you just concentrate on getting in and out instead of thinking, oh, it would be so nice to quit. You don't even let yourself have those thoughts.
Right. So let's end with one final question, which is, you mentioned the bucket list. So I always like to ask people on the show to talk about their favorite race venue. So help me develop a bucket list really quickly, not including Hard Rock or Western States or Hurt, but is there one other race that kind of sticks out to you, is either one that's still on your bucket list or one that you've done that, you know, is notable, that is something that people should really kind of look into, or was something that was special because of the challenge it brought to you?
Well, I think if you're looking at courses, I tend to like to go for like the aesthetics of the course. And then finish line is a secondary consideration, right? How good the finish line is, because that's how we remember the race, is the finish line.
Right.
Cascade Crest has got a gorgeous course. It's an awesome 100. It definitely does not have the best finish line because it's right on a railroad track and at a fire barn. So that could be improved, in my opinion. I mean, there's so many beautiful places in Washington, and they can move it 1 mile away and it would be awesome. So that would be my hint to the race staff, is just move the finish line a little bit so you have just this epically beautiful finish, because that's where you hang at the end. Right. But that course is awesome. So, and the volunteers and the race staff's really good, and they run a really, really tight ship. That's a great course, and very low key. So that one's good. Bighorn's great. You know, that's one of my favorites. One's on my bucket list is Bear 100. I'm going to do this year after UTMB. It'll be one of my, you know, back-to-back 100 things. That's another one. Grindstone 100 is pretty awesome in Virginia. I've heard, you know, really good things about Pinhoti, which it's on my bucket list. Those are some big ones, you know, that I can name right off the bat that come to the top of my mind. You know, and there's some other ones out there, you know, there's so many now. Like, that's why, like, I don't understand why people get so upset when they don't get in a lottery. There's so many good hundreds. Like, you could be racing a different 100 3 times a year, 300s a year for 20 years and not do all the hundreds in the U.S. Right. So why not just go pick something you get into and go race it, man? Like, go have fun. Like that, just don't sweat it. Like, I think people take things too seriously, and I understand it sucks and that you can't get into stuff. And I'm one to talk, because the races that people complain about, I've done. You know, but I got into the sport when it was really small, so that helps.
Well, Jeff, thank you so much for your time today. Really appreciate it. Thanks for sharing some of your stories. You have some of the best adventures out there, and you've done many of the races that are most interesting. So thanks so much for sharing those stories with us, and some of your tips, especially around the nutrition and some of the cross training and stuff, that I think the listeners will find that really interesting and helpful. So really appreciate your time.
Yeah, thanks a lot. Thanks for the time.
Thanks for listening to the Intelligent Racer podcast. For more information on this and other episodes, please visit www.intelligentracer.com. Also, be sure to check us out on social media and please review us on your podcast directory. Join us next time for another edition of the Intelligent Racer.